Good morning. Time to talk again about some of the major events that occurred in the late part of the Middle Ages. In the 1200s, things took a definite turn for the worse. One of the major forces of the 1200s was Genghis Khan. This Mongol came riding out of Russia, well, out of Mongolia, out of eastern Russia, and changed the course of human history. We read about him here and there, but we don't, I don't think, really understand the full impact of what this man did. A little background. We're in the early 1200s. Europe is peacefully going along its little way. We're having our little wars over there with Christian against Christian, not much happening. The Muslims have advanced, but they haven't advanced far enough to really scare Europe badly yet. The initial push back in the 700s was stopped by Charlemagne, and now the Muslim world seems to have settled down for the Middle East, but left Europe alone. When Genghis comes along in 1215, he's a force that's completely unknown. His armies really are no different than, let's say, the tribal Indians of America, the Central Plains area, during the time of the pioneers and the others. The Sioux Indians, the Cheyenne Nation, the Iroquois Nation. I mean, when we say nation, we're talking about major groups of the American Indian that lived on the plains. By the way, American Indian, sorry, not Native Americans. You and I are Native Americans. The American Indians were ununified. They were just separate groups until a major player came along, like Sitting Bull, and united them all into one force to oppose the white man. Well, Genghis did the same thing in Mongolia. The Mongol tribes were simply a plains-dwelling people who lived on their horses, who were basically nomads. They had large, not a teepee, if you will, but it was called a yurt, which is a large circular dome-shaped building, probably 12 to 20 feet across. They are made out of felt. They're extremely warm, capable of withstanding high winds, and were moved about on carts that were the size of a room. If there are no major rivers to cross, if there's nothing but rolling grassland, you can have a pretty good-sized cart and put your house on it, which is what they would do. This is the way that the Mongols moved from place to place until the arrival of Genghis. He was an ordinary man who simply did extraordinary things. He united the tribes. Long story short, he simply went out of his way to unite them, and in the end wound up uniting the entire Mongol nation. This scared the Chinese to the south because the Mongols decided to advance on them. The China Wall had been built centuries before this, but was in place and was a seeming barrier against the Mongols. Didn't work. They came over the top, quickly invaded China, and much to the dismay of the Chinese, took whatever they pleased. The problem with the Mongols is not that they came and pillaged and burned and left. They left nothing. The desire of Genghis and his peoples was a clean, open plain, not something littered with cities and buildings and people. And he was simply the scourge of God, ridding the world of extraneous peoples. Not exactly the type of thing that you and I would like to think about. He simply removed them. This was a campaign of annihilation, of wiping the earth clean. Somebody once asked him, what would you like best if you could have anything that you wanted? And without blinking an eye, he says, a fast horse and the open plain in front of me. Now, that's easy to, it sounds like kind of a guy thing, doesn't it? In other words, if I said to you, what if I told you that you could have any car that you'd like and the road from here to Salt Lake with no traffic, no police, a sunny day, dry pavement, go. That'd put a smile on my face. I could do that this afternoon. I would love to get in a car and just put it to the floor and hold it there, especially on a road that I'm familiar with. That was Genghis. He said, let me go and let me just ride as fast and hard as I can in a straight line, and I don't want to have any things like walls and cities and things like that getting in the way. Yeah, a barbaric attitude, certainly. civilized, not even close. But this is the force that marched out of the central area of Asia, and they marched west, and especially to the south. Now, when they went west, the first places that they conquered were Persia. Persia was the superpower of the day and had been saved from meeting the Mongol armies because there's a huge chain of mountains on the western part of Mongolia that separates that part of Russia, if you will, from the southwest, from Persia and Iraq and Iran and all that area. The Mongols crossed this area. The stories are incredible. They would come to a chasm, to a deep canyon, needed to get the army across. Genghis said, find a way. And they said, well, my lord, you'd have to go a long ways here. He says, no, no, we're going to go across right here. And what they would simply do is find a way to get a rope across it and put some guy swinging on the rope. Once he got to the other side, they pulled some other ropes across. Once they did that, they made a bridge out of arrows. They took simply bundles of arrows, tied them together, used those to make the floor of the footbridge, and made it sturdy enough that they could walk not only the troops, but the horses across the bridge. Once they were on the other side, they took down the bridge, and on the road, off they went again. They were not playing by the rules in the normal sense of the word. And every army of Europe, of the Middle East, the Persians, that went against them was defeated. No one could stop the Mongol army. They eventually, within 3 years, have gone through all of Persia. They've gone as far almost as Baghdad. They have gone west almost to the gates of Vienna. And the only thing that stops them is that Genghis gets old and dies. He had a summons. When he issued a summons, you simply obeyed. There was no quibbling. There was no, gee, can I stay here for a little while longer? His word was rule, and he was getting old, and he simply said, I would like all my sons around me. And they came back and were with him when he died. And that was the end of that campaign. He had a second son. The second great Mongol wave took place under one of his sons, under Ogatai. And he turned right around and went back to the very places where they had left off, conquered anew, and then he died just shortly thereafter. And it was to Genghis's grandson, to Kublai Khan, to finish the entire campaign. This was the third great Mongol wave. This is about in the 1260s. 50s and 60s is when Kublai finally establishes Mongol dominion over all of that part of the world. And his reign, the Golden Reign, will be from roughly 1260 to 1290, 30 years of complete peace. They said that the world was so peaceful under the Mongol reign that you could, they said, a virgin covered with gold could walk from any place in Iran to Japan unmolested, untouched, because everything was controlled by the Mongols. I told you earlier that he had basically killed everything in place. That is true. But once he started invading China in earnest, he conquered one city in which there were many artisans, and they kept them, of course. If you were a good maker of swords, why, we wouldn't kill you. You're somebody that we can use. And the same goes with some smart people. And he found several wise Chinese sages who he used as advisors for how to control the Chinese and what he should do. And one of them said, my lord, think about this. If you kill all these people, there will be no food for you next year, because they are the ones who grow the food to feed your armies. And okay, then let's not kill everybody. And then the next step, of course, was, and why don't you just save all these people, because there are many things which they have which you can learn. And so he, instead of wiping out the people, would simply put a Mongol in place and move on to the next city. And everybody had to take their rule from their laws, their directions from the Mongols that were there. That was how China became a conquered nation. So where does Marco Polo come into all this? Kublai Khan. By the 1260s is where Marco finally arrives. He and his dad, he's a teenager at the time, but he leaves on foot to go see where this Chinese Silk Road is and how to go overland from Italy. He's from Venice, from Italy all the way to China, to the great court in Cathay where Kublai lives. And they make it. Dad and his uncle and Marco, this trio, walks all the way to China. Marco will spend roughly 20 years there and will serve the Khan well. He will serve him so well that when he leaves, Kublai will give him a golden tablet. It looks like a ruler, but it's gold, and written on it, it says, anything that these guys need, give it to them. Horses, food, directions, clothing, whatever they ask, because they're under the direction of the Khan. It is with this that Marco walks back all the way to Europe and tells stories that no European will believe. He tells of huge homes, multiple stories, like 10 to 12 stories high. Of course, Europeans don't believe a word of this. He talks about fireworks, about things that go boom. Europeans don't believe this. Many other tales, all of which, of course, were true, but the Europeans, because they didn't have it, therefore believed that no one else could have it, because they were God's chosen people, and we all knew that. Fools they. Marco brings back two things that will change the course of Western history. The first is rather a silly one. He brings back spaghetti. I know. Spaghetti is Chinese, and then becomes Italian. He brings back the way of cooking noodles that you and I call spaghetti. That will make Italy the Italy of the modern world, with spaghetti and all the rest, with pasta, with, well, I've got to tell you this too. Tomatoes don't exist in Europe until Columbus and his group bring them back. Now that's 1492, 93. So Italy in the 1200s will have spaghetti. It will not have spaghetti sauce until 1500, after tomatoes have been brought from the New World. I know. Think about that. That's just a fun one. The second thing that Marco brings back is gunpowder. Gunpowder is, we think, invented by the Chinese. And of course, they used it for celebrating their birthday, for celebrating great holidays and great occasions. We, of course, had a better use for it, for blowing away your fellow man. And it is the arrival of gunpowder in Europe that, of course, will change the course of Western history by introducing the cannon into medieval warfare. The days of the night are now numbered, and modern warfare is introduced, all thanks to Marco Polo and his visit with the Khan.